In the summer of 1970, you could walk the length of the Atlantic City Boardwalk and not pass a single person. Not in the off-season. Not at dawn, in July, at noon. People who were there said it as a plain fact, the way you state the weather. The boards were warm. The ocean was still there. The hotels were still standing. The signs were still lit. And there was no one. 20 years earlier, 100,000 people had pressed through this same stretch of boardwalk on a single summer weekend. Trains ran 99 times a day just to move them all. The hotels had names that sounded like European palaces: the Tremor, the Marlborough Blenheim, the Chalfonte Haddon Hall. The ballroom at the Tremor held 4,000 people. The pipe organ inside Convention Hall, completed in 1929, remains to this day the largest musical instrument ever built by human hands. And in 1970, the boardwalk was empty. There are cities that decline slowly, the way a great tree goes, rings tightening, bark graying, still standing long after the heartwood has died. Atlantic City was not that kind of decline. Atlantic City fell the way a controlled demolition falls, suddenly, completely, and in a shape that suggested the structure had been hollow for longer than anyone wanted to admit. My name is Asher Thorne. This is Urban Landscape Documentaries, and this is the history of Atlantic City. The story of how the man who invented Atlantic City believed that salt water was medicine. His name was Jonathan Pitney. He was a physician from Mendham, New Jersey, who rode horseback into the marshlands of southern New Jersey in 1819, set up a practice in a small mainland village, and spent the next 30 years staring across a shallow bay at a long, flat, mosquito-thick barrier island that most people considered worthless. The Lenni Lenape had called it Absagami, little seawater. They had summered there for generations, reading the island correctly. A seasonal place, a place you came to and left. Nobody else wanted it. The soil was sand. The interior was scrub pine and mosquito marsh. There was no harbor, no timber, no farmland, no reason. Pitney looked at the same island and saw a diagnosis. Philadelphia, 40 miles north, was choking. 300,000 people packed into a grid of streets, drinking contaminated water, dying of cholera in summer. The industrial city had made itself sick with its own productivity. And here, just across the water, was ocean air, salt breeze, distance. What Pitney understood, before the science was there to explain it, was that what his patients needed was not medicine. They needed to leave. He spent more than a decade writing letters to Philadelphia newspapers, arguing the island was a health resort waiting to happen. He found no doctors willing to invest. He found factory owners willing to invest, not because they believed in sea cures, but because a railroad through Camden County would serve their mills. In 1852, the New Jersey legislature chartered the Camden and Atlantic Railroad. One railroad man, looking at the proposed route, said the words that have followed this city ever since: "A road to nowhere." The civil engineer who designed the street grid, a Philadelphian named Richard Osborne, gave it a name designed to sound grander than a mosquito-ridden sandbar had any right to sound. He called it Atlantic City. On July 1st, 1854, the first train arrived. The island had a permanent population of roughly 250 people. The city was 3 months old. Pitney died in 1869. He had lobbied Congress into building the Absecon Lighthouse after watching too many ships break apart in what locals grimly called the Graveyard Inlet. He had staked everything: his reputation, his years, his letters, on the belief that people would pay for proximity to the sea. He was wrong about the medicine. He was right about everything else. What happened next is almost impossible to explain, except by saying that the railroad had accidentally invented a new category of human desire, and no one knew how large that category was. In 1875, the population was 2,000. In 1900, it was 27,000. Not growth, multiplication. A second railroad opened in 1878 because one line could not carry the bodies. The travel time from Philadelphia dropped to 50 minutes. The fare was cheap enough for a factory clerk. And what that clerk found when he stepped off the train onto that island was something that had never existed in American life before. A place where the ordinary rules of your ordinary life temporarily did not apply. The boardwalk came from a complaint. Guests were tracking sand into the hotel lobbies. Railway cars were filling with it. In 1870, a conductor named Alexander Boardman and a hotel owner named Jacob Keim petitioned the city council. The council spent $5,000, exactly half of its annual tax revenue, to build a mile-long, 8-foot-wide wooden walkway, 1 foot above the sand. They did not know what they were building. No one did. The rule was passed: no commerce within 30 feet of the walkway. That rule lasted about 10 years before commerce swallowed every inch within reach. The boardwalk was rebuilt bigger in 1880, destroyed by a hurricane in 1889, rebuilt wider and higher, destroyed again, rebuilt again. By the 1890s, it ran 4 miles and stood 10 feet above sea level, the most famous promenade in America, wide enough that you could fit a 2-lane road on it, and in peak summer, almost too crowded to walk. Rolling chairs appeared in 1884, wicker carriages pushed by uniformed attendants for anyone who couldn't or simply didn't want to walk. The boards were relaid in a herringbone pattern to give the chairs a smoother ride. That herringbone pattern is still there today, unchanged, the same geometry. The wood has rotted and been replaced a dozen times. The pattern has not moved. Steel Pier opened in 1898 with Annie Oakley. It eventually offered boxing matches, circus acts, and a horse, a real horse, that dove from a 40-foot platform into a pool of water twice daily. Whether the horse had been consulted about this is not recorded. But the real spectacle of Atlantic City wasn't on the piers. It was above the skyline, the grand hotels. They rose along the boardwalk in waves, each one larger and stranger than the last. The island's width forced a certain logic. The lots were narrow, so the buildings had to go up and up to put as many rooms as possible facing the ocean. Architects from Philadelphia came and did extravagant things. Frank Furness put Moorish minarets on the Windsor Hotel. Others brought French mansards, Italianate towers, scroll-sawed porches stacked story upon story, like wedding cakes made of lumber. By 1888, there were more than 500 hotels and boarding houses on this island. And then came 1902, and the fire, and everything changed again. A great fire burned many of Atlantic City's wooden hotels in 1902, and in the ash clearing that followed, the city's hotel builders faced a decision. They could rebuild in wood again, faster and cheaper, or they could build in something that would not burn. A Quaker hotelier named Josiah White III was expanding his property near Ohio Avenue, the Marlborough House, and he hired the Philadelphia firm of Price and McClanahan. What they designed would become one of the most significant buildings in American architectural history, though it would be demolished before most people understood what they had lost. The Blenheim Hotel opened in 1906, was built almost entirely from reinforced concrete, among the first major buildings in America to use the material at this scale. A threatened steelworkers' strike had made concrete practical. Quaker sensibility had made it appealing. Concrete pours quietly, without the thunderclap noise of riveting steel, and Marlborough guests would not be disturbed. The result defied what any reasonable person expected concrete to look like. A Moorish dome, Spanish towers, hexagonal fireplaces in the lobby, a sun gallery that bridged Ohio Avenue like a sovereign crossing a road it owned. Hot and cold running salt water in every room, 4 faucets on every bathtub, a 5th in the bathroom sink dispensing ice water. Winston Churchill stayed there. The Marlborough and the Blenheim were joined by pedestrian bridges and operated as one property, the Marlborough Blenheim. It stood at the corner of Park Place and the Boardwalk. Across the street, the Traymore was embarrassed into ambition. It had started as a 10-room boarding house in 1879. By 1898, it had grown to 450 rooms. But the Marlborough Blenheim made it look small and dated, and in 1914, the owner tore it down and hired the same architects. What rose in its place was 16 stories of tan brick with gold-capped towers, a building so visually dominant that people gave it a nickname that would outlast it by decades. They called it the Taj Mahal of Atlantic City. 1,500 guests, a ballroom that held 4,000, a bathtub with 4 faucets, hot and cold city water, hot and cold ocean water, and a 5th in the sink for ice water. A pool, a ballroom, a convention annex, the most complete hotel in the most complete resort city in the country. People who stayed in these hotels described a particular feeling, the sense that the ordinary texture of their lives had been suspended. The ordinary clerk from South Philadelphia, the ordinary seamstress from Camden, stepped off the train and into a city that had been constructed entirely to serve them. That feeling, the feeling of being served, of being the reason the whole apparatus existed, was Atlantic City's real product. It was not the ocean. It was not the salt air. It was the temporary dissolution of the hierarchy that defined the rest of their lives. The city understood this and priced accordingly. By the 1920s, Atlantic City was drawing more visitors annually than the combined populations of New York and Philadelphia. Convention Hall, completed in 1929 at a cost of $15 million, seated 41,000 under one roof. The pipe organ inside it, still the largest ever built, has more pipes than there are letters in the Old Testament. The Miss America pageant was invented there in September 1921, not because anyone cared about pageants, but because the city needed a hook to keep tourists coming after Labor Day. The city called itself the world's playground. It was not merely a slogan, it was a business model. And like every business model, it required a man who understood how the actual money moved. Enoch Lewis Johnson, everyone called him Nucky, was born in 1883, the son of the county sheriff. He understood from childhood how power moved in Atlantic County, not through elections, not through laws, but through the management of favors, information, and fear in proportions that shifted depending on who you were talking to. His father had the grip. Nucky learned the grip young. He became undersheriff at 22, sheriff at 25. When the previous political boss was convicted of election fraud in 1911 and sent to prison, Nucky stepped into the vacancy with a smoothness that suggested the vacancy had been prepared specifically for him. His official title was County Treasurer. He ran everything. For 30 years, Nucky Johnson controlled Atlantic City the way a landlord controls a building. Not by owning the individual rooms, but by being the only person who knew where all the keys were. He was a large man, over 6 feet, and he wore a red carnation in his lapel every single day. He lived at the Ritz-Carlton. He reportedly took a percentage of every gallon of illegal liquor sold in the city and a cut of every gambling and prostitution operation. His annual income was estimated at more than $500,000, the equivalent, depending on the year, of $8 to $12 million today. He is supposed to have said, "We have whiskey, wine, women, song, and slot machines. I won't deny it, and I won't apologize for it. If the majority of the people didn't want them, they wouldn't be profitable, and they wouldn't exist." When Prohibition took effect in January 1920, it was essentially meaningless in Atlantic City. The city had already structured itself around the idea that certain laws did not apply here. The island was not just a resort, it was a jurisdiction with its own moral geography, and Nucky Johnson was its governor. Atlantic City became a major East Coast port for illegal liquor. Hotels that looked like palaces served drinks in their dining rooms without hesitation. Gambling operated openly. Visitors arrived from Philadelphia, New York, Baltimore, and Washington, not just for the ocean, but because they knew the rules of their ordinary lives did not apply for the duration of their stay. The police had been told, in a language more reliable than any order, to look the other way. In May 1929, Nucky hosted what became known as the Atlantic City Conference, a gathering of organized crime figures from across the country. The scale and precise agenda of the meeting have been debated for decades. What is not disputed is that Al Capone was present, and that whatever took place over those few days, it happened inside the hotels and along the boardwalk of a city whose political guarantor had ensured there would be no interference. A photograph exists, surfacing occasionally in archives, of Capone and other figures smiling together in an indoor swimming pool. The photograph was not dangerous to take. That was the point. Nucky's era ended in 1941. The federal government convicted him of tax evasion, the charges that could stick when the actual crimes were too embedded in the city's infrastructure to untangle. He served 4 years. When he returned to Atlantic City, he sold oil for a living. He died in 1968 in a small town outside the city, still wearing the red carnation. By the time he died, the city he had governed, the city his machine had made possible, was already unrecognizable. On April 27, 1972, at a corner of Illinois Avenue and the Boardwalk, a demolition expert named Jack Loiseau set off the first of 4 controlled charges. The Tremor, the Taj Mahal of Atlantic City, the building that had held 1,500 guests, whose ballroom had held 4,000, whose gold-capped towers had anchored the skyline for 58 years, came down. Not in one moment, in stages. Over the course of weeks, the implosions repeated, each one a sentence. By late May, the building was rubble. The debris was cleared, the lot was graded, and then there was nothing. It set a Guinness World Record for the largest controlled demolition at the time. The record is not the part that stays with you. The part that stays with you is that the site at the corner of Illinois Avenue and the Boardwalk became a vacant lot. And it remained a vacant lot. Not for years, not for a decade. It is still a vacant lot today. In 1968, 4 years before the demolition, the Tremor's owners had spent $5 million on renovations, new elevators, air conditioning, a convention center addition, trying to stop the bleeding. It was not enough. The hotel closed permanently in October 1971. The Tremor was not alone in its fall. The Dennis, the Shelburne, the Brighton, the Chelsea, the Breakers, the Mayflower. They came down one after another through the 1970s. Buildings that had taken years and fortunes to build, demolished in days. The Marlborough Blenheim, Price and McClanahan's concrete masterpiece, the Moorish Dome, one of the first major reinforced concrete structures in America. The building that Winston Churchill had slept in was torn down in 1979. The hexagonal fireplaces went. The Sun Gallery that had crossed Ohio Avenue went. The Dome went. Why did it come down? Not because it was structurally unsound. Not because it was beyond repair. It was demolished because a casino company had purchased the land and wanted the square footage. The company was Bally's. The casino still operates on that corner today, under that name, on the ground where the Marlborough Blenheim once stood. By the end of the 1970s, of all the grand pre-casino hotels that had lined the boardwalk, the buildings that had made this city the most celebrated resort in American history, only a handful survived in any form. And the ones that survived did so only by being converted into something entirely different from what they had been built to be. This is the thing about Atlantic City that no reckoning for the city has ever quite confronted directly. The city did not merely decline. It destroyed its own history. It demolished the evidence of what it had been, not because the buildings were beyond use, but because the land they sat on was worth more cleared than occupied. A city willing to do that to itself is a city that has stopped believing it will exist long enough for history to matter. In 1974, New Jersey voters were asked whether to legalize casino gambling in Atlantic City. They said no. 19 of 21 counties voted against it. Methodist ministers across the state had warned their congregations from the pulpit on the Sunday before the vote. The measure failed by a large margin. 2 years later, in November 1976, the question was asked again. But this time, the referendum was limited to Atlantic City alone. The argument had narrowed and sharpened. It was no longer about morality. It was about survival. Atlantic City was dying. Casinos were the only instrument large enough to stop it. Vote yes and save the city. Vote no and watch it finish dying. It passed by a margin of roughly 1.5 million to 1.1 million. A company called Resorts International had been watching carefully. Before the vote, it had already purchased the historic Chalfonte Haddon Hall, the old Quaker Hotel, the wartime hospital, the building where amputees had learned to walk again, for $2.489 million. When the referendum passed, Resorts moved fast. $11 million in renovations, a casino floor of 33,000 square feet, 84 table games, 893 slot machines. On May 26, 1978, Governor Brendan Byrne cut a ribbon. Entertainer Steve Lawrence rolled the ceremonial first dice. Resorts International opened as the first legal casino in the United States outside Nevada. People lined up on the boardwalk for hours to get in. In its first month, the casino took in $16 million. In 1978 alone, the company reported profits of $51 million. The next year, $91 million. Revenue jumped from $59 million in 1977 to $407 million in 1979. For a moment, a brief, bright, genuinely intoxicating moment, it looked like the bet had been right. Caesars in 1979. Bally's in 1979, the Sands in 1980, Harrah's in 1980, the Tropicana in 1981, Trump Plaza in 1984, Showboat in 1987, and on April 2, 1990, the largest of them all, the Trump Taj Mahal, a building whose construction budget had started at $250 million and ballooned to $930 million, whose developer would eventually sue to remove his own name from it. A building named, whether by accident or intention, after the nickname once given to the hotel that had been demolished on this same stretch of boardwalk to make room for the casino era. At their peak, in 2006, Atlantic City's 12 casinos generated $5.2 billion in gambling revenue. They employed over 34,000 people. The boardwalk had lights again. The city had a reason to exist again. But here is what nobody said clearly at the ribbon cutting in 1978. Here is the thing that was true from the first day, visible to anyone who looked long enough. The casinos were fortresses. You walked in from the boardwalk. You gambled. You ate at the casino restaurant. You slept in the casino hotel. You left. The city outside the fortress walls, the neighborhoods, the schools, the streets, the businesses, the people, continued to decay while the gaming floors generated billions. A restaurant owner named Kugel saw his revenues cut in half within months of the first casino opening. By 1986, his restaurant was a parking lot. In 1978, Atlantic City had 311 taverns and restaurants. 19 years later, 66. The last movie theater closed in 1983. A wave of suspicious fires, locals called it landlord lightning, moved through neighborhoods adjacent to the casinos, as properties worth modest rent were suddenly worth more as potential parking lots. The median household income, measured in the census survey from 2006 to 2010, was $30,000. Over a quarter of residents lived below the poverty line. Over a third of children. Atlantic City had found a new promise to sell. But the structure of the promise was identical to every promise that had come before it. The money came in from outside and left with the people who had come to spend it. The city was the container. It was never the destination. The casino era ended the same way the resort era had ended. The same mechanism, the same logic, the same failure of the same imagination. In 2004, Pennsylvania legalized casino gambling. Casinos opened in Philadelphia and the Poconos and Bethlehem, closer to the population centers that had been driving 2 hours to Atlantic City. Maryland followed. New York followed. Delaware followed. Connecticut had already built Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun. The Atlantic City gamblers' 2-hour drive became unnecessary when there was a casino 40 minutes away. Casino revenue peaked at $5.2 billion in 2006. Then it started falling. Every single year from 2007 through 2016. Not some years. Every year. A decade of continuous decline. By 2013, revenue had fallen to $2.86 billion, a 45% drop in 7 years. A Moody's analyst described it with the precision of someone who had seen this before. The decline predated the recession. It was a function of two things: a failure to reinvest in the properties and the arrival of casinos in neighboring states. In 2014, the reckoning arrived all at once. The Atlantic Club closed in January, the Showboat in August, the Revel on September 2nd, Trump Plaza on September 16th. 4 casinos in a single year. Nearly 8,000 people lost their jobs. The mass unemployment processing at Convention Center, where more than 100 workstations were set up to handle the suddenly jobless dealers and cocktail servers, was the most visible single day of the collapse. The revel was the cruelest chapter. $2.4 billion to build, the most expensive casino ever constructed in Atlantic City, possibly in the world at the time. It was conceived as the anti-casino casino, a luxury resort that happened to have gambling, aimed at a younger and more sophisticated clientele who would come for the spa and the restaurants and the ocean views, and might, incidentally, play a hand of cards. It had banned smoking. Gamblers don't care about health when they're gambling. They left. It had no buffet. Bus trip tourists turned around at the door. It charged hotel rates that matched its ambition. Guests went to the Borgata instead. The revel opened in April 2012. It closed in September 2014. 2 years and 5 months. At $2.4 billion invested, it sold for less than a nickel on the dollar. Its tower, the second tallest building in New Jersey, stood dark on the boardwalk for years afterward. A monument to the failure of the idea that you could save a dying city with a sufficiently expensive building. This was not the first time Atlantic City had tried that. The Tremor's owners had spent $5 million on renovations in 1968 to stop a decline that had been underway for 20 years. The casino referendum itself had been premised on the idea that the right building, in the right place, could reverse the forces eating the city alive. And now the revel, the most expensive bet in the city's history, had failed in a shorter time than most people's car loans. The lesson was the same lesson it had always been. You cannot spend your way out of a structural problem. And Atlantic City's structural problem had never been that it lacked buildings. Atlantic City was invented. Not settled, not grown from a river crossing or a natural harbor or a mine that someone stumbled across. Invented. Dr. Pitney invented it. Richard Osborne drew it on a map and gave it a name more resonant than its geography had any right to suggest. The railroad made it real. And because it was invented for a single purpose, to attract people and extract value from their presence, it has lived and nearly died by that purpose, again and again. Here is the pattern, stated plainly. Atlantic City acquires a monopoly. First, the monopoly on accessible sea air for the working classes of Philadelphia and New York, accessible only by rail, which ran only to here. Then, the monopoly on legal East Coast gambling, in a country where gambling was otherwise forbidden. The monopoly generates staggering revenue. The revenue attracts investment. The investment creates a skyline. The skyline attracts more revenue. The city looks, from the outside, like it is thriving. And then the monopoly breaks. The railroad monopoly broke when automobiles and cheap airfares gave people the ability to go somewhere else. The casino monopoly broke when neighboring states legalized gambling. And when the monopoly breaks, Atlantic City discovers the same thing every time. It had not built a city. It had built a toll booth. The hotels, the boardwalk, the casinos, all of it existed to extract revenue from people passing through. When those people found another road, there was nothing underneath to hold the place up. No diversified economy. No major employer unconnected to tourism. No reason to live here except to serve the visitors. This is the particular cruelty of a company town where the company is a season. Other places have recovered from industrial collapse. Detroit built automobiles and can, at least in theory, find something else to build. Pittsburgh built steel and pivoted to medicine and technology. Their economies had bones. Atlantic City was constructed without bones, on purpose, because bones slow down the extraction. The city was always meant to be used up. That is not an accusation. It is a description of the original design. Pitney wanted to bring people to the island. The railroad wanted to move them there and charge them for the ride. The hoteliers wanted to house them and charge for the rooms. Nucky Johnson wanted to charge for the drinks and the gambling and the things you couldn't get at home. The casino operators wanted to charge for the chips. Every iteration of Atlantic City has been a more sophisticated version of the same transaction. Come here, spend your money, leave. And as long as Atlantic City was the only place offering what it was offering, the transaction worked. The moment a cheaper, closer, more convenient alternative appeared, the transaction ended.
A monopoly is not a city. A monopoly is a temporary advantage. And the history of Atlantic City is the history of what is left when temporary advantages expire.